Welcome to a special series where we interview a host of notable people from the Genius 100 Summit in Los Cabos, Mexico, on the moment that changed everything. Here, you'll learn their secrets to success, gain invaluable insights into what shaped their careers, and key takeaways on what it takes to be a leader in their field.
This is absolutely what we need. This is absolutely the future. We have to get on this.
Talk to people who think so beautifully about big, complex challenges.
G100 Los Cabos, Mexico, a special series on the moment that changed everything.
What were you like as a kid?
Fearless, and also obstinate. Everybody in my peer group smoked, so I didn't. Anybody in my peer group wore a certain set of boots, so I didn't. And I guess I set myself apart in trying to be different than everybody else in just what I decided to do. I guess I didn't succumb to peer pressure.
And so what age are we talking about?
10 to 15.
And you're from St. John's, what was the community like?
Very small, a small place, but when you live next to the ocean, it's very easy to see how big the world is, because you see a horizon that you're looking at the curvature of the earth. When you eventually know that it's not a flat earth, you realize that the earth is round, and you're seeing, you can't see the distance, but there's nothing in front of you.
And is the flat earth because of the Flat Earth Society being in Fogo Island?
Yes, how did you know? That's very good. Yeah, one corner of the flat earth is on Fogo Island.
So I was always fascinated by that, but also people from Newfoundland talked about flat earth. Every once in a while it came up in conversation.
Well, I think it's heritage and tradition. We come from a melting pot of England and Ireland and Scotland and the rest of Europe. The Basque, were in our shores before the Vikings. The Vikings were there. I think we learned how to survive as a culture. And very much like the French, where you speak French today in Quebec French in France, and sometimes they don't know really what you're talking about, because it was Old French that was taken and crystallized in time. So I think Newfoundland growing up was a lot like we crystallized the way England and the British Commonwealth and certain parts of Europe, the way that was in time, and it took a longer time to progress in Newfoundland because people were too busy surviving to allow much growth in terms of culture and arts and those kinds of things. And then we developed our own, and it's homegrown. So the technologies, I'll give you an example in terms of technology and innovation. What we're finding in the seaweed business, and we can talk a lot about that, is if you need to innovate in how you harvest, the best innovators are the fishermen, the herring seiners that have been on the water forever. They will find the path of least resistance to get you the highest impact by changing a configuration of a few of their dollies, or by creating a ramp at the bow of their vessel with which to bring the seaweed on board. Or in the fish plants, if they need to produce a different way or a more efficient way to process crab. You leave it to the folks that work the line all the time, and their buddy who owns a welding shop down the road, they'll say, if we just had this instrument, or if we processed it in this way, we would get so much more efficient. So he didn't have to go outside the community. Innovation happens at home.
So tell me, why seaweed?
I guess it's because I believe we can do a better job of creating new and innovative products in a sustainable way, in harmony with our environment, without the concept of exploitation. In other words, we've exploited the ocean and we have leveraged it for transportation. We've leveraged it for natural resources, for protein, say for fisheries. Fish farming is another example. We have leveraged the natural capital and not paid for it. And I wanted to demonstrate that it didn't have to be that way, that we could extract materials, new green materials from the ocean, and do it in a way where you're actually leaving the ocean in a better place than when you found it.
But going back, just one step back, how was it seaweed? What was the impetus that created that you thought this is what we should do?
I spoke with a seaweed researcher. In my quest, I was given a mandate to find new business for Vancouver Island. And we started with a blank slate, and we looked at many opportunities in forestry, in cultural tourism, in clean tech. And the whole aquaculture business intrigued me because it was employing a lot of people. And it was generating about $1.2 billion in GDP for British Columbia. But when you looked at it on the surface, people that care about the planet were having an awful problem with the way we overexploited through salmon farming. Yet when you peel back one layer of the onion, you see that it's a broader discussion. And one of the things that was really untapped, but coastal Canada and coastal British Columbia at that time is a wealth of beautiful water, vast tracts of coastline, which very few people inhabit. They used to inhabit. First Nations were a lot on the coast, and villages up and down the coast. Now they gravitated more towards urban centers, as en masse. And I felt the exploitation of, in harmony with the planet, we can do something. But the kicker, to be honest, when this, I had heard a few years previous to that carrageenan, which is a seaweed product, which is almost a requirement in the making of ice cream. I had heard...
What's it called again?
Carrageenan.
How do you spell that?
Oh my, Caraghegan, something like that. What we heard was carrageenan, the biggest source, and Nova Scotia was a big provider of dulse, which is loaded with carrageenan. Most of that seaweed comes from wild harvest. And with changes in ocean temperature, that species was under duress. It was under stress from climate change. Yet we had the opportunity to cultivate it. In other words, to get reproductive tissue, to bring it to a nursery on land, to allow it to propagate in the nursery, and then bring it back out into the ocean and plant it and supplement what's there. And I asked the scientist at that time quite specifically, will this solve the ice cream problem? And he said, yes, it will. And with that, I was sold on the prospect of seaweed cultivation.
Do they call it seaweed farming?
Seaweed farming, yes. In ocean farming, seaweed farming is what it's called. And when you think about it, the parallels, not just in the process of creating it, but in the language. For example, I'll tell you how you farm seaweed. As I mentioned, you go to the coastal zone with which you're going to put a farm in. You take seaweed reproductive tissue, you bring it back to a nursery, which is aquaria, in a lab, and you allow it to blossom. And then you allow those little floating sporophytes to sit on a piece of twine that you have wrapped around plastic cylinders. And that twine, in 60 tanks, represents 100 kilometers of twine. So after you propagate it, now you have 100 kilometers of twine with 3 to 4 seaweed babies every centimeter or more. And you go out to a farm, which is essentially a long line in the water that's strung between 2 anchors and 2 floats. And you lay that twine out on this production line, and you go away. And Mother Nature does her thing. She provides it with nutrients. She provides it with sunlight, if that's important for that particular species. And in 4 months, you come back and you have from a little baby that may be a couple of millimeters long to kelp, in some cases that could be 18 feet long. It grows massively fast. It grows 20 times 20 times faster than terrestrial plants and trees. So it captures carbon at that rate, which is why it's fundamentally a net primary producer of carbon. And as a net primary producer, it's more important than tropical rainforests.
So can you further explain that so everyone kind of understands?
We're sitting in a beautiful coastline here in Mexico, and whether you're in the tropics or whether you're in the temperate climates or further north, marine algae, marine microalgae, and marine macroalgae make up a fundamental component of the ecosystem. It is under threat, as we all are with climate change. So we're seeing, because of greenhouse gases, we're seeing a heating of the planet which changes circulation patterns in the ocean. And seaweed that's used to having, say, 10 to 12 degrees centigrade in the ocean are now seeing 14 to 16 degrees. That will change the dynamic. Seaweed doesn't thrive, at least in the temperate seaweed, it doesn't thrive well in warm water. So we are seeing biomass under threat because of warming temperatures of the sea. So unless we have an industry that's out there trying to ensure biodiversity is maintained, we can do this at the same time as we can extract seaweed from our farms, because we're putting it in there to begin with. We can improve biodiversity. We'll have a much better understanding of the mechanisms on how to protect seaweed as the climate changes. We know we're heading for a warmer temperature than 1.5 degrees. That's just clear now. So we need to do what we can to both preserve what exists today in biodiversity of seaweeds. And off the coast of British Columbia, there's 600 species. There's 12 to 15,000 species of seaweed, of macroalgae. You know, you can keep seaweed as a seed for at least 4 decades in water. So, the very least, we should be sampling every species we can get our hands on and trying to propagate the seed. So just as the global terrestrial seed bank sits in Svalbard, we should be doing the same for the seaweeds that we have off our coastlines. Otherwise, we could have 3 or 4 years of heat blobs coming in, the water temperature goes up, and the seaweed will just stop reproducing under those conditions.
Bill, the name of the show is The Moment That Changed Everything. Okay, what was your moment?
Well, the ice cream moment I mentioned.
Was that it? Was that the thing that, okay, this is what I got to do?
In the seaweed world, yeah, that was the thing that I realized was nobody's doing this in the Western world. Why not? And that's when I got together with like-minded colleagues, and they asked the same question: why can't we do it? And we couldn't come up with a logical reason. So it's almost, it's almost a challenge. I mentioned earlier I was, obstinate. I said, well, nobody else is doing it, so, well, we're going to do it.
We've been with Bill Collins at the Genius 100 Summit. This is The Moment That Changed Everything, and I'm Lawrence Metrick. Thanks for coming, Bill.
You're welcome.
Can we do this again?
Anytime.
To learn more about how you can support G100 initiatives, visit genius100vision.com.